The book Blood Meridian stands as one of the darkest works of modern American literature. Written by the late Cormac McCarthy, it is set in the mid-19th century on the Texas-Mexico border, a place that was largely lawless. At this time, the US government placed bounties on Native American scalps. Scalps served as a gruesome proof of death. Private groups were often rewarded for delivering these Native American scalps to the government. Blood Meridian offers a fictional narrative entrenched in the harsh truths of these horrifying events. But one part of this book stands out from the rest. Quite literally. Judge Holden. A tall, hairless, albino man. He's this ambiguous, hyper-intelligent man who roams among the cast of the book, almost godlike, not only for his outlandishly bizarre appearance, but the way he acts too. He delivers multiple monologues regarding his heavy philosophies about death, war, and violence. He doesn't seem to age, and he claims that he will never meet death. Did I mention that he was a real person? In the book My Confession, author Samuel Chamberlain details his real experience with the Glanton Gang, a gang of scalp hunters. The work is a vulnerable look into Chamberlain's struggle with guilt. The tone is quiet and somber, a meditation on his experiences with violence he both witnessed and perpetrated. McCarthy modeled much of his book after this real historical event when crafting Blood Meridian. Though the tone is melancholic at times, the book details horrifying things he saw firsthand. Chamberlain does not shy away from detailing this violence. He consistently describes people being killed in his gang's violent bloodlust, shamelessly ripping their scalps as rewards for their sadistic and gruesome methods. There's a layer of emotional horror in his work too. Chamberlain was traumatized, evident by the tones of remorse and horror riddled throughout his phrasing. This book is like a window into a gruesome but true past, a terrible stain on American history. But most damning of all, the most ruthless and terrifying member of the gang, Judge Holden. A man towering at 6'6", skin dull and the color of aged bone, with a hairless face that refused any emotion. He was the second in command of the Glanton Gang, almost like he were the devil whispering in Joe Glanton's ear, telling him where to go, directing their unstoppable bloodlust. Chamberlain hated the judge at first sight, and the judge knew, yet the judge would frequently seek out conversation with Chamberlain. He says, "Yet nothing could be more gentle and kind than his own deportment towards me. But don't be mistaken by his seeming compassion. The judge was a brutal man." Chamberlain writes, his desires were blood and women, and says they often heard rumors of crimes that the judge committed, yet no one called him out. On one account, apparently they found a little girl of 10 years, foully violated and murdered. The mark of a huge hand on her throat pointed the judge out as the ravisher, as no other man had such a hand. But though all suspected, no one charged him with the crime. Chamberlain's relation to the judge was complex. While no explicit claims in the book ever said the judge harmed him, this fact made the judge far more terrifying in my opinion. Chamberlain never felt the judge's barbaric lust for violence on himself, but he witnessed the judge practice horrible acts of ultra-violence. He was not among the tormented, but rather among the devils that instigated the bloodshed. His remorseful perspective in the book shows that he was not one of these devils, or rather did not wish to be considered one. Chamberlain never said this, but from what I gathered, the judge also knows this much. He knows that Chamberlain felt uncomfortable in most instances with the gang. It seemed like the judge was purposefully exaggerating Chamberlain's feelings, effectively toying with him in a cruel way. The judge was also intimidating for another reason: his intellect. The thought was dreadful. Someone so barbaric and blood-starved could also be so grand with intelligence, which might lead one to believe that in all his knowledge, he found reason and justification to act as he did. Chamberlain wrote that the judge frequently lectured the gang about anything from wildlife to geology, demonstrating his thorough and exhaustive understanding of all. He could speak many languages, said to have conversed with all in their own native language. He was by far the best educated man in northern Mexico, as Chamberlain describes it. Yes, someone so talented with all their elaborate wisdoms, also murdered and violated children. The judge, even in Chamberlain's book, feels like a force. He doesn't feel like a real person, but an embodiment of something terribly cruel. Like he's always there, his all-seeing eyes always invigorating discomfort in Chamberlain. He's almost godlike, or some sort of myth. Did I mention this book is the only account of Judge Holden? Chamberlain's book is considered a historical account, but it's embellished. It's written stylistically instead of deliberately describing events. He clearly wanted to capture just how he felt, and the things he saw in disgusting detail. Many other descriptions and figures in the book match up with other accounts. John Joel Glanton was confirmed by other sources like newspapers to be a real figure, and much of the events that took place were precise, remaining unlikely that anyone could have written such an account without experiencing it or hearing of it. But not the judge. This does not necessarily disprove the judge's existence, but his mythological depiction in the book does beg a few questions about his existence. He feels kind of obvious. Like, if there were any evil person, it should be him. He was large and menacing, he had no hair and was pure white. The color white was also associated with God or natural dominance in Moby Dick, a book rooted deeply in symbolism, which McCarthy also took a lot of inspiration from. He was called the Judge, but it was never explained what he was the judge of, almost symbolizing some kind of religious judgment. It may seem like the Judge was created by Chamberlain, perhaps because he wanted to create a mythic and symbolic character. Maybe he created the Judge as a manifestation of his experience and his trauma, and that the Judge was not a real person. This would make sense, however, mythic or symbolic fiction kind of got popularized in the late 19th century, especially in the 20th century, with Moby Dick being written a few decades after Chamberlain's work. Was Chamberlain just a forgotten pioneer of this genre? If you're a trained viewer, you probably notice a contradiction in something that I said. Earlier, I called the Judge the color of aged bone, sort of like tallow, which is how Chamberlain describes him, not as purely pale. I also paraphrased the description of his face, describing it as lacking hair. The Judge was not pure white, and likely wasn't entirely hairless either. A depiction of the Judge by Chamberlain himself actually shows him with long hair. The actual excerpt describing the Judge reads, "A face destitute of hair and all expression," but doesn't say his head or body shared the same traits. The common image of the Judge comes not from Chamberlain's description, but McCarthy's description. The mythic presentation of the Judge, while raising questions on Chamberlain's authenticity, was only really mythicized by McCarthy. Still, it is fascinatingly interesting to think whether the Judge existed or not, and how much he was dramatized. The Judge, if he was real, was still a terrible man, indeed a spawn of the devil. However, McCarthy's iteration of the Judge is an entirely different entity. As I mentioned earlier, McCarthy drew a lot of inspiration from My Confession, basing many characters off of it. The Judge was intriguing, and paired with McCarthy's incredibly cinematic writing style and super elaborate descriptions, he got to work on giving the Devil of Northern Mexico a voice. Cormac took many liberties. He went full in with the Judge being hairless and painted him pure white, likely with inspiration of the color white significance in Moby Dick. He also had methods to portray the Judge not just as a man, but as a force. Let's talk about a few of those. Firstly, the Judge was made to be omnipresent, an embodiment of war and evil. Cormac McCarthy riddled these ideas throughout his dialogue, evident in one of the most famous passages: "Whatever in creation exists without my knowledge, exists without my consent." Whether this was meant to be poetic by the Judge or literal, it still remains eerie. Another thing about the Judge that renders him omnipresent is how the characters meet him. The Judge's first appearance in the book is actually in the first chapter, where the main character, known as the Kid, unintentionally encounters him. A preacher is delivering a sermon when the Judge interrupts him and calls the man a fraud, not only claiming he knows little of the word that he preaches, but claims that he is a criminal. The crowd violently turns on the preacher while the Judge watches. The Judge exercises power over the truth, happily watching the violence that he caused. After this, the Judge completely vanishes, until about page 70, depending on the version you're reading, of course. The Kid's first experience with him is almost passive. He doesn't directly interact with the Judge. When he shows up, it isn't grand. It's like he was always there. Like he never arrived, but rather the people noticed him at a certain point. When the majority of the gang first met him, he was apparently naked on a rock, as though he were waiting for them. Later, he lectures to the gang, claiming that war was always here. Even before man was, war waited for him. The ultimate trade awaiting his ultimate practitioner. This solidifies him as war, and solidifies war as a binding force, a divine connection shared among all humans. By the end of the book, everyone has died in the main cast. All except the judge and the kid, who meet again after a time skip. The judge himself didn't kill all of the cast, and even the ones who he may have killed are only vaguely implied, like the character the idiot, who the judge carries by a leash. Each member slowly gets picked off and killed. At the very end, the judge violates and destroys the kid, who at this point was aged enough to be known as the man. I know, very creative. The details of his death are spared, yet something foul is heavily implied. The judge hasn't aged a day in years, apparently. After he deals with the kid, or the man, he plays the fiddle and dances, something heavily associated with the devil in many Christian texts, and wears a terrible grin. The final line says, "He says that he will never die." When I first read part of Samuel Chamberlain's The Confession, I was certain that the judge was a fake, made-up character to represent Chamberlain's experience. But the more I looked at it, the more I realized a lot of the associations that I make with the judge regarding symbolism and what he represents is largely from Blood Meridian. Though with that being said, the judge in Samuel Chamberlain's book is still worth talking about, while the true iteration of the judge in his work is more believable than McCarthy's iteration. It's still really interesting to think about. Was the judge made up? Was he real? There's no other accounts of him, but everything else in the book seems accurate. Hello. I guess this is kind of a face reveal. I was talking to a friend who I'm just going to address as Tia, that's not their real name, but it's just a placeholder, about an excerpt from Blood Meridian. I never thought about this excerpt much, but I think it ties the ideas of this video together really well. There's a part in Blood Meridian where the judge is drawing certain things like pieces of rock and flint and bone, and then writing about them. A Tennessean by the name of Webster asks the judge about it. He admires his endeavor to document everything into his notebook, but Webster asks that he may not be included in that account. The judge replies by saying, "My book or another book." He follows this by saying, "Whether in my book or not, every man is tabernacled in every other, and he in exchange, and so on in an endless complexity of being and witness to the uttermost edge of the world." This excerpt, in my eyes, basically says that as long as something exists, it's prone to having different interpretations of it. The self is not owned by the self. Our identities are constantly rewritten by different people's opinions and interpretations of us. When we die, these interpretations or accounts of us are the only proof that we existed, and therefore become who we are. With the judge, it's particularly interesting. Chamberlain's work is the only known work of the judge. Therefore, however Chamberlain decided to write the judge is how he now exists. Whether Chamberlain decided to make him super dramatic or just a random guy is completely up to him. This kind of highlights the power that the writer has. This whole part of Blood Meridian unintentionally reveals the dynamic between Chamberlain's work and reality itself. Cormac McCarthy saw the raw potential of a character like Judge Holden and went full send on making him a mythicized figure. Cormac McCarthy gave the devil a voice. Thank you for watching this Peak Stasis video. If you enjoyed this video, consider checking out my other content, and if you enjoyed that, consider subscribing. Thank you all, and I'll see you in the next Peak Stasis video.